So I'm now going to start. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this joint webinar on building your profile as a difference maker, jointly hosted by Advisory Board Centre and Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand, Hong Kong. My name is Elizabeth Chan, the head of Hong Kong of Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand. At this time, we have the privilege of extending this joint webinar to all our Asian members, including members in Singapore and Kuala Lumpur, members of Advisory Board Centre, and our business affiliates. So before we bring on board three esteemed speakers, we'll have our Council Chair, Mr. Vincent Leung, to introduce them. So let me give us a few house rules for this joint webinar. This webinar will be recorded and we'll have a Q&A section towards the end of the webinar. So you're welcome to ask questions through the chat button in your bottom. So now, may I hand over to the Chairman of Hong Kong Overseas Regional Council, Mr. Vincent Leung, to introduce our three panelists. Over to you, Vincent.
I don't think we can hear you, Vincent.
Vincent?
Is that better?
Yeah,
No.
it's all good.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Cool, okay. It would help if I put my microphone in. Good afternoon, everyone. I also like to extend the warmest welcome to everyone who's joined us today from Singapore, KL, Hong Kong, and Australia. A couple of points of housekeeping first, so please ensure you are on mute. I understand you'll probably have plenty of questions for our wonderful panelists today, so please just chuck these into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen as and when you feel necessary. We will address the Q&A questions at the end. We expect there will be an avalanche of questions, so we'll do our best to get through those. Before we start, I think I'd just like to share the genesis of this seminar. So it's really a meeting of minds between the Advisory Board Centre and Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand. Both of our organisations have a strong emphasis on best practice leadership, delivering tangible value to our clients and stakeholders. But more importantly, we strive to provide the right tools and skills for our members to deliver on this. The goal to drive change and to be a true difference maker. Each of our distinguished panelists are change agents in their own right, so we're very pleased to have them join us today. First up, we have Louise Brookman. She's the founder and CEO of the Advisory Board Centre based in Brisbane. She's an award-winning entrepreneur, researcher, and business advisor. She's received much recognition from industry and government at both local and national level. She established her first advisory board in 2004 and has provided a first-hand experience of how a well-run advisory board can deliver value. Next up, we have Deborah Biber. She's an expert marketer who focuses on companies to differentiate themselves and navigate roadblocks of daily business life. She's currently the CEO of Blue Moon Advisory. She's also a certified advisory board chair. You'll learn about this a little bit later. She's recently appointed as advisory board chair of Earthquake Green Impact Fund, BCC, and our previous roles, interesting, have included being a board director of Auschan Hong Kong, CEO of Auschan Hong Kong, and CEO of the Pacific Basin Economic Council. She's a current chair and former chair of the advisory board of the Entrepreneurs Club. Our third and final speaker is Martin Liu. He's had a wonderful career in international hotel financial and operations management. He settled in Hong Kong after moving from Hyatt International and has been with the Peninsula Group for a rather long time. He jumped out a few years ago, and now he's working with SMEs in a variety of industries as an outsourced CFO. And he's recently also become a certified chair with the Advisory Board Centre. So on that note, I'd like to pass to Louise.
Thank you very much, Vincent. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here and share this event with yourself and Elizabeth. I'm going to provide, to start with, a bit of an overview of who we are and the research that sits behind the way that advisors are engaged and where is it that they actually make a difference. I'll also cover off background to advisory boards and where they're heading, and then we'll open up into an open conversation with Deb and with Martin to explore advisory boards and what it means for individual professionals. So the Advisory Board Centre itself is an independent professional body overseeing best practice for advisory boards. We're in 10 countries. We operate from Australia, but we focus on research, education and professional development advocacy for advisory board professionals and the impact that they have. Our purpose is to raise the standard of the global advisory sector and driving value for the professionals who are working in it and for those businesses that they serve. It's a very important role. We take it seriously. I just want to provide a bit of an overview of how advisors are actually engaged in the market from the most informal to the most formal. And then I'll explain about the difference between advisory boards and governance boards because they often get confused. So in driving value in advisory services, businesses will generally go to the people that they know and trust the most to start with, people who are very supportive, and that starts with family and friends, as well as peers in business where you find mutual support. It's supportive on an individual level, and they want the most for you on an individual basis as a business owner. The next level of engagement is around business network groups. So when businesses go to a business network or a chamber, like AusCham, you mentioned earlier that Deb's been involved with. So they're business network groups where entrepreneurs support fellow entrepreneurs, and it's a peer-to-peer relationship. That often people say it's lonely in business. And so these network groups really provide a really important function for the socialisation of business owners. The next level is informal advisory boards. In the past, this is where advisory boards really sat. When a business owner would informally gather people in business that they know, sit around the table, generally don't pay them, chair their own meetings, where it's a very loose, supportive environment, but there's no level of accountability that sits with it. Then we have the level of consultation around individual professionals' skill sets. So the accountant, the business coach or the mentor, a consultant, or an individual expert advisor. This is when it's a one-on-one engagement. Now, where we see that is a very important relationship, sometimes the edges become grey when a business owner looks for all the answers from one person about everything about their business. So it can be problematic after a period of time when an owner asks an individual for their opinion or their advice on something that's not the core area of expertise. And it can be troublesome because an individual, out of the wanting to help somebody else, will fill that void when sometimes they may not need or should do that. Formalised advisory boards is the space where we sit, where there's an independent chair, there's a charter. Generally, advisory board meetings are 4 or 6 times a year, and the advisory board would function from an 18-month to a 3-year period, and there's measurement of impact on an annual basis. So they're the key components to a formalised advisory board, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And then governance boards is the deepest and most formal level of engagement, where there's a board of directors. It's legally binding. It's under a lot of scrutiny, and rightly so, because it's a serious undertaking. Now, the difference between a governance board and a formalised advisory board, there's a few key factors. Generally, governance boards meet 10 to 12 times a year. Formalised advisory boards meet generally 4 to 6 times a year. A governance board is a decision-making model, and it's binding. It's binding on the individual director on the decisions that have been made, and it's binding on them personally as well, and it's binding on the organisation to then implement on the decisions that have been made around the table. A formal advisory board is quite different. It's not a decision-making model, it's a problem-solving model. So they're there to road test ideas and thinking, to really create debate and maybe not reach consensus, but have a thinking system to road test ideas and to support owners who are then the ones that make the decision at the end of the day. So they're the key differences between governance boards and formalised advisory boards. Advisory boards ultimately it's a change-making moment, and it's an area where you can make significant difference, because very often it's about the future. It's about being optimistic. It's about blue sky. It's about being enthusiastic and being impactful on somebody's business, but also on them personally. So it's a very optimistic environment to be involved with. And then when you look at the sort of the picture with the explosion of colour, that's when you're dealing with business owners, and the key market for advisory boards is businesses 1.5 to $100 million turnover businesses. That explosion is on the inside. It's right for the advisory board to really harness that and to make sense of that, to then create intelligent conversations and ultimately an intelligent partnership between advisory board members and the business owner, where they're thinking together in a peer-to-peer environment. It's highly impactful. The most common structures for advisory boards is two internal representatives of the business. So it may be the two business owners, could be two executives, could be a business owner and a shareholder. But that's the most common approach of having two representatives when they start. A business will generally recruit for an independent certified chair to start with, and that chair will then establish the advisory board. It takes generally 3 months to establish an advisory board, and then assist the business with getting their internal governance in order, and then support them as they're recruiting advisors for the future. And most commonly, advisory boards start with 2 approved advisors. And advisors can come from all sorts of different backgrounds. It depends on what the business needs are as to what are the advisors that they will recruit for. So it may be an entrepreneur that have already gone through what the business owner is about to go through. Could be C-suite executives, could be people who are industry or subject matter experts that they want to tap into for what they are focusing on in the next 18 months to 3 years. So the setup phase is the establishment phase by the independent chair, the advisory board meetings 4 or 6 times a year, which includes the owners and external advisors. There are different types of advisory boards, and this is really interesting because this market is constantly changing. The majority of advisory boards are all of business advisory boards. So as an advisor sitting on an advisory board, you're there to support the owner with everything about their business. They still make their own decisions, but you're across everything that's happening in the business. What's opening and what's changing in the market is the emergence of project-based advisory boards. So 34% of advisory boards are project-based, and they're there just to fit for purpose for a specific function. So we say to Australian businesses, if you've got a business operation in Hong Kong, you should have an advisory board in Hong Kong to be able to support your business interests and protect your asset in market, or have at least one advisory board member from Hong Kong in the advisory board in Australia, just as an example. Other types of project-based advisory boards are ones that are around, overseeing maybe a merger or an acquisition. It could be the implementation of a new strategy. It could be around technology. It could be reviewing supply chain. It could also be around a commercialisation strategy, but just one strategy. The emergent market, though, is where it's not big now, but it's going to be very big in the future, and that's corporatized advisory boards, where governance boards are constrained under directors and officers insurance increase in costs, as well as the ongoing constraint of being a director. So what we're seeing is governance boards actually reducing in size and then building advisory boards around it, so you can take high-risk conversations off the boardroom table and take it somewhere else. So corporatized advisory boards is a very interesting space, and it's certainly going to be a growth market for people who are wanting to make a difference in a corporatized environment. Our research shows when someone's working in advisory boards as well as in other functions, you have to be careful about not mixing your roles at the same time. So there's a difference between when you're an executive inside an organisation, either full-time or part-time, when you are there to be a decision maker and an implementer, versus being a contractor when you're there to complete specific tasks and functions. Being an advisory board member, not getting caught up in the detail and making sure focusing on context, not at content. And then those that are consultants and service providers who are there to do a specific function or a project, to go and do that piece of work and leave. The conversations in each of them are all very different. And for those of you who are interested in being involved in advisory boards, you need to be very careful not to mix those functions at the same time. If you're an advisory board member and you want to be a service provider, then resign from the advisory board role and become a service provider, and vice versa, because it creates conflicts of interest, potential issues around shadow directorship, and also role confusion. So it's very important to be able to understand where those boundaries are, because it's an ethical issue at the end of the day. So ethics is an important part around advisory boards. I did mention that shadow directorship is a issue for advisory board members to really carefully navigate. So in February this year, we released the world's first best practice framework for advisory boards. They've taken 8 years to build and develop something that's really, really simple. But the foundations to understanding the ethical boundaries is around 3 key pillars, which is around purpose, process, and people. So if you're really clear about your purpose, then you have clarity of scope. If you're clear around your process, then it's around having the right structures and disciplines in place and measurement as well of impact. And then once you've got the right purpose and structure in place, then it's about engaging with the right people around an advisory board, making sure that those advisory board members are independent of the business, but also independent of each other, so the vicarious liability doesn't sneak into the equation around the advisory board, and also that those advisory board members are fit for purpose. They are chosen because the business need is directly linked to the value that individual advisor will create. But all roads lead around the ethical boundaries to the chair. So the chair really needs to know what they're doing, what the structure is that they are putting in place, and then managing and monitoring the ethical areas of grey that can sneak into an advisory board setting. Our certified chair program, the executive program, is designed to support people to be highly effective chairs and to be resourced into doing that. And today we'll be, I guess, sharing that with both Deb and Martin to provide their feedback on their roles and the chair certification to prepare them for the future. So Deb, I'm going to hand over to you. Can I just ask you if you're able to share your experience about advisory boards and how they make a difference from your perspective?
Sure, Louise. Thank you so much. And thank you to the Chartered Accountants. I'm delighted to be back speaking to you. I believe I did so several years ago. In terms of advisory boards, to be able to find a setup like an advisory board with an ethical framework and with the right kind of rigor and thinking behind it, so that one is trained to be a certified chair, trained to be a chair and become certified in that way for advisory boards, was really a kind of light bulb moment for me, having run I've been on both Auscham's board and also then went in to run it. And the same with PBEC, where I was its CEO and now I'm on its board. So a little segue differently. And advisory boards for me would have made a huge difference to both organizations, and I may yet be able to implement them, but it's going to take some time to turn the ship around. But the thing about advisory boards for me is that they don't have that they're so, particularly the ones that are project based, have a very specific beginning, middle and end, a job to be done. Whereas, you know, on boards, and particularly volunteer boards, everyone is terribly busy. Everyone wants to be on the board, and often they're not actually given a job to do, even though they really would like to have one. And that's my experience of boards in my way. But I think that the advisory board structure, in order to be able to produce real outcomes, real work, real project-oriented work, is invaluable.
What do you see that?
Absolutely invaluable.
Yeah. So Deb, what have been the constraints in the governance board, when you're saying if you've done it again, you probably have an advisory board and a governance board? What have been the constraints in the governance board that you weren't able to achieve what you thought you could?
Because the governance board generally, in my experience, appoints most of the board members for the sake of the face, the look of it, as opposed to actually getting anything done. And I'm sorry to be if that's a little too forthright, but it's really the truth. And I think as a CEO reporting to boards, if the governance board could be reduced around financials and risk and those sorts of key elements, and that all of the action and activities and jobs that need to be done, whether they be fundraising or marketing or membership, recruitment, could all be done through each advisory board, or an advisory board set up as a project with people who are really interested in working in that area or have the experience to work in that area. And so the outcomes and the net result for the organisation is really positive, because people are doing the right jobs.
It's all about focus, isn't it? So
it is focus.
Yeah. So how is it that I think for someone sitting on an advisory board, they're able to maximise their impact on an advisory board versus, you know, engaging in different ways with an organisation?
Well, because you don't have the constraints of, if you like, the risk constraints of a governance board. Because this is a thinking organisation as an advisory board, and because it's not a decision-making, I mean, it provides all the right information for the decision to be taken by the company. Then what it does is it provides, if you like, the CEO with action and outcomes and focus and deliverables.
It's a really interesting relationship, isn't it? When you haven't got any skin in the game, and there's no ulterior motives for being there. Deb, you're now taken on a chair role for a global organisation. Tell me about what that experience is and what you're looking forward to in that role.
Well, it's a very interesting situation, because this is the development of a green bond that's going to be raising money to connect into micro, not SMEs, or maybe some S's, but micro and S enterprises in the Pacific. So in Fiji, Vanuatu, etc., Papua New Guinea. and the organisation is going to launch its green bond. And I actually did say to the CEO that financial instruments were not really my area of expertise, but that was his area of expertise, and I didn't really need it. And what he was actually hiring me for was governance, ESG, for my network, for my the work I'm doing with the UN out of Bangkok for sustainable business, that sort of thing. So it's really very interesting. And we've identified 2 advisors, and the CEO actually has spoken to both, and I'm about to speak to both. But the most important thing was that the charter was already there. The advisory board that the CEO of this fund had already done some homework about setting up an advisory board and had done the technical course that the advisory board centre offers. So in fact, I had to run to do that course as well to make sure I was on the same page as my CEO. So he understood, and his charter was very good, and it had some input from me and some input from some other people in his organisation. So now we've got a very strong charter. We know what we're going to do, and we have a purpose. And all of that has just been set up in the last month or so, at the most. And we've identified the 2 advisors that we need. And I'm just working on something right now to connect the CEO into the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, so that we can see, what we can do. But anyway, it was a remarkable experience. This is my first advisory board, and so far, touch wood, it's gone very smoothly. But I would say that that's because I've done the certified chair course, and my CEO, who put in a request, an expression of interest for this advisory board to the advisory board centre, knows what he's doing and knows what he's getting.
It was an interesting scenario when he came to us, when we curated it through the advisor concierge and scoped out what their needs were as a business. I remember having the conversation about having somebody who's not from the sector, and I think it's really interesting for those of you who are seeing themselves as industry experts. Industry is really too narrow. And can create conflicts of interest when you go too narrow with what you're going for. So if you look at your sector experience rather than industry, you're actually broadening out your value and broadening out your market and how you can influence the market as well. So Deb, the future of advisory boards, what do you see? What do you see that, given your global perspective around directorship and I guess professional services as well?
Yeah, I see the future being very project-based. I think the chartered accountants are a fantastic platform, if you like, for advisory boards, because I think, Louise, in some of your research, financial acumen is considered to be the most attractive thing in terms of bringing on an advisor or bringing on a chair of an advisory board. So I think that's really important. I think the project-based advisory boards, if I could go back, and I'm trying to do this with Auscham and with PBEC, is to look at some of the activities that board directors are supposed to have, and make those board directors actually do the certified chair course and become certified chairs of a project-based advisory board. So they still have the status, if you like, because being on a board, is a partly about status, but they still have the status. They won't lose that, but they'll actually be doing something specific that they can point to and say, yes, we delivered that.
No, No, that's great. And when you measure economic impact on an annual basis, you can actually see the results of what you're doing.
Oh, because you're dealing in specifics and not generalities on a board. You know, I mean, the number of board meetings I've been at in my life where it's literally tick every box next to each item on the agenda, and you know, all have a coffee together and go. And in fact, nothing really substantive gets done. And I think, and also taking the pressure, I think taking the pressure from the boards of some of these more project-oriented activities would be good for the board too, because the board can then focus on the things that it should do from a duty of care point of view, which is risk and financials and, you know, the financial health of the business. And everything else is really just a project. I see the two of them working very closely together. I see them actually being working in unison.
Yes, yeah, it's a fabulous resource for board of directors. Thank you for that, Deb. Martin, I might just come to you. You're a CEO, been very successful in your career. Why did you join the Advisory Board Centre and the community?
Thanks, Louise. Hi everyone. Great to have this little webinar. I'm really happy to have Louise and Debbie speaking to our members. It's a wonderful treat for us, actually. So, it's a kind of continuation. I moved from a full-time executive role into the CFO Centre and started, you know, doing this consulting work and outsourced CFO work. But I found myself often getting dragged into the business and operational support areas, you know, attending to the cash flow, the financial reports, the KPIs, all of those sort of things. And where I really like to operate is the strategic level, which is strategic planning, exit planning, the risk assessment, those sort of things, looking at the competitive landscape, all those fun things. So I found the Advisory Board Centre, and through Debbie, actually, I saw she'd done the chair course. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. Let me have a look. And it was perfect for all the things that I wanted to move into, with learning how and understanding how to become a chair, how to better profile myself with my clients and the people I'm working with. The network is fantastic because before I had a lot of finance guys, but not so many on other areas. So I've really enjoyed having some Zoom chats with people on culture, the lean and agile management, you know, different specialties. But these resources, those people are available for me to call on as and when I need them, which is fantastic, and drop them in. And then the resources I found fantastic. Louise has run through a bunch of different slides. In our executive chair program, they're explained in a lot more detail. There's a lot of information, really good information in there. But the technical foundations course has been fantastic to get, you know, the parameters right. There are some risk elements which are very, very important to understand that Louise just briefly glossed over. So that was good. And one of the biggest things, I suppose, is this business, when I get started with an engagement, is that business growth survey and score.
Martin, how has your approach changed for, you know, your overall portfolio?
So whereas before I get quite frustrated with business owners because as soon as they hear anything about finance or CFO or outsourced CFO, they have you in a box, and I don't want to be in that box. I regard myself as a business advisor, and somehow this Advisory Board Centre has opened up that aspect of me and being able to operate in that much better. So like I was saying, that business survey that we do and the growth score is fantastic for just opening up a bigger discussion, pinpointing the areas of concern and letting me go in there and look at the whole of the business.
I'll just explain. The business growth score is an annual assessment that a chair does before the advisory board starts, and then they do it on an annual basis to be able to measure quantitative and qualitative results in the business and measure the impact of the advisory board. Tips, if you've got any specific tips there, Martin, for others looking at, you know, building out and wanting to contribute more and making a difference.
I have. I was going to talk about being curious, which is Sandy Dean's catchphrase, of course. Out of curiosity comes opportunity. I love that. Just be curious, learn how to develop that skill of being curious, really listening to people, asking open-ended questions. I think we all want to jump in and start talking about our experience and what we can bring to the table, selling ourselves. But the first thing to do is just be curious, ask questions, find out stuff, all sorts of stuff. You never know when it's going to come in handy. I really like LinkedIn for that sort of stuff, to as well, to general knowledge. Focusing on helping others build their business is, I think, really important. Have that service mentality. These are skills that chartered accountants can easily move into if they're not that experienced with it. There's plenty of good resources to learn how to do that. And sort of following on from that, if you are in talking with someone who might be a client, be very careful to understand the whole of what it is that their issues are before starting to advise, because that one, you can cut down a prospect immediately by just starting to talk about where you think they want you rather than talking about what the real issues are.
It's an important piece, isn't it, Martin? We talk about this a lot in the program about you're there to really not judge, but to really understand where they're coming from, because otherwise you move into being a service provider and a consultant and it shuts it down. So thank you for that. Deb, have you got any tips at all?
Yes, I think the biggest tip is just to become, I started my portfolio career when I left the chamber, but I probably really only have just started it in the last year. And this is an adjunct to what I do anyway for clients. But this is doing it at a strategic yet tactical kind of level. It's a very interesting mix of the two. I think that you need to be open-minded. I think you need to do the course, frankly. I think you need to think, I believe you need to think beyond where you are today, and the role that you have, and what do you want to do in the future when you actually have stopped full-time work. And really consider that. I mean, the other thing we haven't really talked about advisory boards is that they are, as far as the advisory board centre is concerned, they are paid roles. So this is actually, my advisory board is a paid role. And it's really interesting when you start off like that, then more things come to you in that way. So I would say, just think about your future, where you want to be, what you want to be doing.
Yeah, thank you. I've written down some of my tips here, and Martin, that's my number one too. Be curious, research and learn from the market. Keep a learning mindset. It's ultimately you're not engaged on an advisory board because of your knowledge. It's because of the way that you think. And when you're working with the business, you've got to learn about the business, and you're learning with them and you're problem solving with them. So really think about your thinking rather than purging your brilliance on somebody else. It's about supporting them in the decisions that they need to make. Be current, really invest in your ongoing professional development. One of the challenges I saw back 7 years ago was that people were sitting on advisory boards purely as a retirement strategy. It is so not that. You have to be current. You have to have the insight in the market and the foresight for what's next. No matter what your age is, it's about making sure that you are on your A game. So the market that we support, generally 75% of them want to have an advisory board because they want to grow. So if they want to grow, they're focusing on what's next. You need to be up there with them rather than one step behind. Be really targeted, gain clarity of what your personal value is and who's going to value it. So you can't be all things to all people. You've got to know where your boundaries are and where your focus is, because advisory boards, there are businesses everywhere that need this support. So you need to really, really be super clear around where your value is and focus on that. Be connected, find a diverse tribe who will elevate you. So wherever you are out in your networks, Don't focus on networking, be focused on being deeply networked, because that is part of your value of being in the know and being a handy person to know. And then last one for me is be determined. You've got to put the work in. You can't diverse your portfolio without putting the hard yards in, and it's not easy. No one can do it for you. But that's where the reward is. It takes time to build your reputation in the markets. Don't go out there trying to sell it. Go out there and try and add value, and that will position you, I think, in good stead. So, Vincent, that's the end of our conversation piece.
Wonderful. Thank you, Louise. Thank you, Deb, and thank you, Martin. I think there's plenty of wonderful insights there. Maybe we'll just kick off some of the Q&A. One question I had, I think, from a personal point of view, given that a lot of our members on the call here today are probably fairly young, the first question is, do you see age as an inhibitor? So we were talking about the thought process, your high for your thought process and all that kind of stuff, but what's your thoughts on age? Maybe start with Louise first.
Sure. Thanks, Vincent. Age shouldn't be a barrier. We're seeing people moving into the advisory board space earlier in their career than what we did 3 years ago. So it doesn't need to be a sequence of I've got a professional career and then I've got a portfolio career. People are choosing to have a portfolio career much earlier on, saying I'm not going to allow one job to define me. And as well as being able to have a full-time role, as well as being able to open up your connectedness to the market and have experiences that you can actually take back to your job too. Now, a lot of corporate entities are seeing that as good corporate social responsibility to enable their employees to be able to also sit on advisory boards. My chair started chairing our advisory board 6 years ago when he was 30. And a real quality advisory board chair. So when it comes down to what does the business need, what's the kind of thinking that we need around that, and then that's not defined by age at all, I don't think.
Right. Deb or Martin, do you want to chime in your thoughts?
I can say something on this. I think it's really depending on the business and depending on the need. I think it's really clever for advisors on advisory boards to be younger if that's where the company is and the product is or the opportunity is. But I don't really think age is the qualifier so much as experience, and I suppose experience does come with age, but also doesn't necessarily have to. So either way, being older or being younger, I don't think is the issue. I think the issue is following Louise and Martin's tips, and that is being deeply networked, being targeted on what you want to do, and most of all, bottom line is adding value. So if you're not defined by age, either younger or older, but you can add value, bring value, then fine, great. I think it's just so wrong at this point in our lives to actually focus on these demographics in a way that is pejorative. I don't think age is a problem here.
Right.
Yeah, I'd like to add just a little bit, which is the advisory boards tend to they meet once a month for half a day is the commitment you have to make. And if you're on an advisory board, the chair will have everything laid out, and you just need to come along with you're having reviewed things, understanding things, and then bring your whole self there and your expertise and everything, and join in the discussion. And road test the ideas and that sort of thing. So the actual commitment for an advisory board for an advisor isn't so great that you can't add it on to an existing full-time career job. And the technical foundations course is a very, good thing to do. The cost is fairly minimal to be a member of the advisory board centre. I don't know if I can say that, but may as well go ahead and in there. It's 1,000 Hong Kong dollars a year, 1,000 Australian dollars a year to be a member of the Advisory Board Centre, which is tremendous. The value in that is tremendous, what you get out of that. The chair program is a different thing, and that's a specialised thing, which does take a lot of work and effort. But to be an advisor, I think people can start early on in their career and start looking for these opportunities, do the course, understand what's needed, and then start developing the skills, the ones that I was talking about earlier, and develop.
Wonderful. I think as we touched on before, as the financial acumen, financial literacy is a wonderful stepping stone. But sort of how do you grow out of that is the next step that people want to take. I guess the next one is probably around access. So in terms of what steps should one take to start sort of getting to know the right people? What circle should they be moving and shaking in and that kind of thing? So maybe you have any specific advice on how your journey has sort of led towards this, Louise?
Yeah, mapping your market. Think about yourself as a business. There's a program that we've released which is called Building Your Portfolio Career, and one of the key things that I developed in that program was about understanding how you're positioning yourself in the market, and who is it that you need to not know, but also those who need to know you. So if you're positioning yourself in the advisory space, I think in some ways you need to really position yourself as a thought leader. So what is it that you're thinking about, and what's your thought leadership about? What are the things that you really care about? And who are the others in that ecosystem that care about those things too? And market mapping is one of the activities that in that program, but it's something that we do with our network on an annual basis, that people evaluate how they're positioned in the market. The market moves, and the players change out, and the market sentiment changes as well. So I think keeping yourself really strategically positioned in the market about who you know, and if you are superficially connected, or actually you are connected in a purposeful way, and who knows you, and who do you know, but continue to keep an eye on that market, because it does constantly change, Vincent, I think.
Deb, Martin, any thoughts?
Debbie's got a huge network, so she's a great person to know.
No, but the thing is about networks is that they require a huge amount of work in order to maintain them properly, and they require you to be of interest to someone. So it's a give and get relationship. And it can't just be all give. So the thing about it is, when people, like for instance, LinkedIn, very good example of this. If someone wants to link with me and they just send me a connection request, I generally 98.9% of the time I just delete it. If they couldn't be bothered to write me a note and say who they are and why they want to link with me, because then 60 or 70% of those people I say yes to, right? Even though my rule is that most of the people on LinkedIn that I'm connected to, I've got over, nearly 3,000 on LinkedIn just without thinking about it. That to me, I know them all. If any one of them rang me and said, do this for me, or do you know so-and-so, I would know them and I would do that. So I think it's making sure your network is really not just an accumulation of business cards, but actually real connections.
So a lot of it's building your profile in certain, I guess, forums such as this, or perhaps any other sort of forums that you might suggest? I mean, Auscham is probably a good one.
Auscham is a very good one. I think, this is my whole focus during COVID has been to upskill myself. And that's why that was part of doing the certified chair course. And I think that constant upskilling is really important. So chambers of commerce are excellent. I think the best way, your organisation is an excellent organisation, but the best way to get the most out of your organisation is actually volunteer and get involved and do things and build your profile that way, which is how I did that with Auscham. I was a member of the chamber for 5 years before I went on the board. And then I was on the board for 5 years, and then I went in to run it during SARS, because for all sorts of reasons. And it was during my time as a member of Auscham, working on this committee or that event or this event, that actually I won my seat on the board, because I certainly wasn't a big check writer, right? I wasn't one of the big Australian companies, but I was a doer. And that's another reason to, that's another way of building your profile, is to be a doer. And there are so many organizations in Hong Kong where you can actually make that happen. I'm sure it's exactly the same in KL and Singapore and elsewhere in Australia too.
I agree. It's about being involved, isn't it? Sorry, Vincent.
Yes.
Yeah, it's great advice. It's just being intentional about everything is also important. Just don't fall into things. Look into what you'd like to be involved, what your natural interests are, where you think you can have some opportunities, and just get involved, and don't be afraid to step up, which, Vince, you're a good example of this. You're not afraid to step up and step into this big role that you have with the Chartered Accountant. So, that's what it's all about, is just getting involved, stepping up, because all of us have a lot to contribute if we just make a bit of effort. So,
very kind words, Martin. Thank you. I think that's a very good point. Sort of just doing what you like, and everything else falls out afterwards. So, be it the money or the status or all that kind of stuff. So, being on the board for the right reasons.
Yeah.
Probably we'll touch on just quickly. Might defer to you, Louise. We've got a question here around maybe a bit more about the qualification and the advisory board centre. So maybe if you could probably touch on where you want to go take the certified board chair qualifications and sort of level of acceptance in the market, and sort of what are your thoughts on that, and where do you see that qualification going?
Vincent, it's an interesting one. So the certified chair is for advisory boards, but also committees and internal meetings. So for those people who are interested in becoming an advisory board professional, and add that into a critical component to their portfolio, if you're wanting to establish, manage, and chair advisory boards, it's the must-have qualification. Global qualification. It's the only one globally around this space. So the chair credential goes with that. Now, we are having a growing group of people who are taking the qualification because they're a senior executive of a multinational or a large organisation where they are chairing meetings internally, and they're wanting to upscale their internal committee meetings, making them more effective than a committee, and shifting them into an impactful advisory board. But then they're also able to use that qualification for advisory boards outside of work as well. So it becomes a professional development thing. So we've got some senior executives in Singapore, for instance, that are in multinationals that are implementing advisory boards within the corporate entity itself, which I think is it's a smart move on their behalf. Now, the why I see that is going to continue to be a growing need is that in 2016 I did a study on 611 businesses and 26,000 employees, and looked at the quantitative analysis from 2008 to 2016 on what drove employees crazy, right? And so the number one thing that drove people crazy was meetings. Right, and so everybody hates meetings, and so if corporate executives can be better in the way they run their internal meetings and have that culture of meetings from internal going towards their advisory board, which is external, then you're going to get better flow and get better purpose that occurs around the decision making and the problem solving at an executive level in organisations. So where I see this is going is that advisory boards are going to continue to grow. Corporate entities are going to continue to use advisory boards as a safety net. And then the business sector, 6% of businesses are really high growth businesses. That's the market that will continue to use advisory boards as well. So you've got to know what you're doing if you're going to be chairing an advisory board. It can be tricky knowing where the boundaries are between different functions of the executive team and the board of directors, and also managing external advisors to maximise their impact and getting the best out of those advisors. So yeah, it'll be continue to add value, I think, to people who want to really work in this space.
Brilliant. Cool. Maybe one last thing, given time, probably around the robin. What any particular skill you've had to unlearn from your professional training or from your experience to be a better board advisor?
Unlearn. I think critical is listening. And in most people in business do a lot of talking. And I think that's the thing that I had to unlearn was to listen. Really understand.
Martin, Louise, maybe you, Martin?
For me, it would be don't go into the detail. As an accountant, it's very comfortable for me to jump in and start sorting things out. It's not where I want to be anymore. I give the instructions. The financial controller, I'm happy to, mentor them a bit, but I'm not going to train them in their job, and I'm not going to start banging out cash flows and forecasts and stuff. I want the guys to do that. I'll give them the framework, but don't jump into the detail and stay at the strategic level and just place yourself exactly where you want to be. The business owner doesn't know me from Adam, so I can be whatever I want to be for that business owner. So that's quite important. Just forget about whatever I was, and I'm just there as a strategic advisor, very competent professional. I know a lot of stuff, and I'm here to help you.
Brilliant. And Louise?
No, there's a few, but listening with purpose is a skill, absolute skill, and less is more.
Less is more, yeah.
Yeah, I want to actually just add one more thing too, that it sort of came to me. As a consultant, I spend my whole life solutioning, finding solutions, immediately jumping to a conclusion, a solution, etc. And in fact, in the advisory board space, you have to unlearn that. I find myself when I'm talking to my CEO and we're talking about things, I want to go to say, I can do, and then I pull myself back because actually that's not what I'm there for. I'm not there to do what I said I would do, what I just was about to say I would do. I'm there to actually manage and listen and think for him. So it's quite interesting.
Takes a lot of discipline.
Yeah, I'm learning.
Well, it's that mantra, less is more. So I think that's...
Yes, I think, well, absolutely. I've always been a big believer in that.
Vincent, Martin came up with a perler of a comment about advisory boards. He says it's freedom in a framework.
Yes. Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah.
Participation and sort of high concept.
Yeah, it's good for us because as professionals, especially CFO guys, we all know very clearly what we want to do. We don't want someone telling us we have to do this, this, and this. But what we've got with the Advisory Board Centre is a framework, a best practice framework that we can fit into and perform and behave the way that we like to perform and behave. So it's not constraining at all, but there's certain things that it will protect you from if you follow this best practice framework, and the business owner will get a lot more value out of the engagement. Heaps more value out of the engagement than they would if you just went in there and tried to do it on your own.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think so as well. Well, I think that's probably all the time we have today. So on behalf of Chartered Accountants Australia New Zealand, thank you, Louise, Deborah, and Martin. It's been a pleasure to speak with you guys. There's plenty of wonderful tips and strategies that we shared today that people can take up. And if you have any questions specifically around the Advisory Report Centre, then please do reach out to Louise directly or our other panelists for that matter. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much for your time. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks very much, Vincent.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Vincent.
Yeah, thanks, Vincent.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
And thank you, Elizabeth.